All right, welcome everybody. I'm going to do a mix tutorial, kind of a music production tutorial. I'm going to break down my track for Come Out in Jesus' Name, which is a song I did for a documentary of the same name that's now out on streaming, but was in theaters for a while. And cool film about deliverance, and seems to have gotten a lot of response, specifically this song. So I wanted to kind of break it down and maybe teach you some things about music production and arrangement and some of the decisions that I made. Feel free to disagree or use your own way, but I'll show you how I did things. So let me switch my screen here. We'll get into it. All right. So these days, more often than not, I use Logic Pro. I've used Pro Tools and some other things, and they all work just as well. These days, I just find myself using Logic a lot more. It's kind of what I got used to for the last couple years. So everything I'll be talking about is shown from Logic, but all the principles as far as how the inner workings of various DAWs, digital audio workstations, they're all the same. So you have an arrangement section here, mix section, and then your different outputs and buses. All those, they might be configured a little differently, but for the most part they'll be similar. So show you kind of what I got going here in my mix window. Some vocals. In Logic, you can create what's called a track stack. It's essentially like, so you can either bus them out. A bus is something where you take a bunch of tracks and you send them, like here it says bus 5, to a non-physical output, but a virtual output. Could be physical if you have a mixer. You send audio down a line into another output that's controlled by a fader. So you get a whole bunch of these things. You see all these vocals are going to bus 5. They're coming here to this single fader. So then I can treat them all together, can treat them individually. They have their individual levels, and I have their main level. I can turn them all up or down here. And in Logic, it's called a track stack. So you see here, like if you wanted to select all these tracks, Control, click, and then create track stack. It's a folder stack and a summing stack. It's different. I think summing stack is more like a bus where you have a fader. The folder stack, I think, is maybe just putting them into a folder. I don't use that one that often, but so you can just send them out a bus. Change the output, send them one of these buses, and it will create a bus down here. Which you see here, these are all my different buses. Buses could be reverbs or delays. Could also be it's called parallel, which this vocal distortion is parallel, meaning I'm busing the signal out. I'm sending the vocal in addition to the main signal to another place, and I'm mixing it in. So I got the main signal and I got a secondary parallel to it. I'm kind of easing it in to add another element. That's kind of a mix trick you can use in a lot of different ways. But then, I use buses for pretty much everything that's going out before it goes out the main output, which is here. I send them to buses. So then I have control over all of my drums, all of my keyboards, all of my guitars, all my vocals, all my effects. I can treat them if I need to all together. Just a way to kind of consolidate things. I've heard that by doing that, it actually helps contain and kind of confine your sound in a good way, help it mix-wise, just kind of having everything going through these paths. So that's how I have my mix set up. You see here I have a bunch of acoustic guitars going to bus 31, which looks like it's my guitar bus. I have these electric guitars. These are all going to bus 4, which is my electric guitar bus, and then that's then going to my main guitar bus, which is down here. A bunch of drums, samples here, all going to bus 28. So that's my drum bus. What else? Yeah, pretty much it for the mix section. I'll get into what, how I mix them and the arrangement, but come over to this window, which is your arrange window. It has all your different tracks, and show you kind of what I did here. So start off with this. It starts off with an acoustic guitar that kind of has an effect, kind of an old effect on it, kind of make it sound old-timey. So this is an effect by Isotope. It's a great plug-in company called Vinyl, and you have these different ways to make it sound old. So you see the years here. Each of those has a different tone. You can make it more warped, like if you have a vinyl record that's warped or scratchy or dusty or wear or lo-fi. And then what you hear there where it goes do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Maybe not exactly like that, but it's what's called the spin down. It's like if you were to slow down a record player, it would go woo, 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 woo. And so how I did that was through automation. If you hit A on your keyboard in Logic, it'll open up all your automation, and you can automate anything you want. So that just means you go in here, you can draw. Let's see, you have the pencil tool. You can draw lines. You can automate volume, pan. You can automate any plug-in, control. I mean, anything you want, you can automate. And by automate, that just means you could tell it what to do at any time. You can use these here, automation levels, to do different things. Anytime you touch a knob or a fader, it will make it react to that. So it's called writing automation, and there's different ways it responds. But here I have it where that, telling it that spin down, here, you select all these things that you can automate. And what I'm selecting is on the vinyl plug-in, here's all the things you can automate. So spin down, and then I tell it to start here. It's on. So that's what's going on there. So it starts off with that. And sometimes this acts weird. I don't know why it does that. There we go. Starts off there, just kind of acoustic guitar, just kind of setting a tone for old bluesy vibe, And then we're in with the vocals. We got the vocals. We got acoustic guitar, which is kind of just chunking along here, kind of doing the rhythm. 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and so kind of it's like a train. We're into the song and we're moving, but you'll notice it's kind of sparse. The way that I like to think of music production is like a roller coaster. You want to kind of ease in. It's what's called dynamics. You want to take people on a ride. You want to kind of ease in. There's a climax, and then come down the other end, and everything's building up. Excuse me. So I'm starting off pretty low, pretty simple, with the vocal, acoustic guitar, and then this kick. And I'm doing that with, this is a drum machine. No, this is just a sample. So sometimes I'll use the drum machine here, Drum Machine Designer, which you can drag and drop samples, or they'll have built-in stuff. A sample is just a pre-recorded something. It can be any type of sound that you can then manipulate and trigger using a MIDI controller, or sometimes what I'll do, I'll just drag and drop the samples. That's what I've done here onto the grid. So every kick is right on the, see the grid up here is, we're at 91 beats per minute, 4/4. That's the time signature, meaning it's 4 beats in a measure, and the quarter note gets the beat. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have the kick on those beats, and the acoustic guitars that on those beats too. So sometimes if you just want a quick and easy way to, without having to play stuff, you can just drag it onto the grid, duplicate it, drag these, duplicate it, and then you got, this pattern going. So that's what I have here at first. And these sounds, they're all from a sample company called That Sound. They're out of Nashville, and they make great sounding drum samples. They're just kind of ready to go. You don't have to mix them. They're already mixed very well and recorded very well. So
there's a Holy Ghost revival when preachers preach the word. This world is in denial.
So we got the acoustic guitar. I'll show you what I'm doing on my acoustic guitar. Both my pretty much everything that was done live and not programmed, which in the box or MIDI, was done live with microphones and like acoustic guitars and vocals and stuff like that, was done with Slate digital microphones. And at the time I was also using their interface. So they make products that model vintage gear, and so you have, it's called the ML1 and ML2, which is their two microphones. Right now I'm using the ML2, which is their small diaphragm microphone. It's like $150, and it's essentially like you buy one mic and you get 10 or 20 of the most famous mics, some of which, you see this here, would probably, if you were to buy it in real life, would probably cost you $3,000. So this is the mic catalog. You get all these mic models, and so they've designed it in a certain way that's really clean and linear, so when you put these things on, it's like applying the sonics of what these mics sound like. So you have SM57, which is a dynamic mic. You have a vintage 57, you have a SM7, 421. These are all mics that are widely used in recording studios. Each of them would cost you, this is $100. This is probably more because it's vintage. This is $350. See what I'm saying? Like all these, these are thousands of dollars. So they've done a pretty sweet thing where they've allowed artists to have these sounds without paying an arm and a leg. So that's what I'm using on most of these, if not all of them, that were recorded live. So you run your mic in, you pick your mic sound, and you can, after you be recorded, you can change this to whatever you want, whatever is the best sound, which is kind of what I did for a while, was see what's the best, what gives me the coolest acoustic guitar sound, which is like, in this case, I went with this. And then this is a preamp model. It's modeling an old Telefunken preamp, which gives you, it's just kind of warm. It's essentially like running your microphone through a piece of hardware that has, wires and voltage and transistors and converters and transformers, all these things that make music sound analog or warm, or it's doing that. So same thing with all these. This is a compressor. It's modeled after an old vintage, it's called 1176, very famous compressor that has a certain character to it that reacts a certain way. So all of these pieces of gear have certain sonic characteristics that give you a sound. This is modeling a Neve console EQ or a Neve EQ, and it's such a squeaky chair. That gives you kind of a warm, they all react in a certain way. These are a much more aggressive EQs. So you kind of, over here you have these different options for EQs and compressors and different things that give you different, and they're all modeling either very famous vintage pieces of analog gear that cost thousands and thousands of dollars, or they've kind of designed their own. So it's a wide range of stuff, and I pay like $10 or $15 a month or whatever to have access to these. It's a pretty sweet deal. So you can see here what I have my acoustic guitar set up.
But let the truth be heard.
You can hear, all right, I'll just show you. So pull this out. Big difference. Fuller, tight, you see the compressor needle, but it's a slow attack. So slow attack, slow release, these settings affect how the compressor works with a source. Usually a slower attack allows more of the hit, or the what do you call it, the transient. It's like the punch or the front end to be more exact or impactful, and then the faster the attack kind of rounds that out. So the best thing to do is just run stuff through it and mess with it and see how it sounds. You'll understand. And then I'm boosting over here. I'm boosting like 3.2 kilohertz, kind of like some presence. I'll show you again without it. So you hear that big difference. A little more present, but also I like to roll off. I tend towards more vintagey, warm, less digital sounds. A lot of times when you get into the digital realm, there's all this kind of weird, really high-end stuff that just doesn't sound real to me. If you listen to music that's made with analog equipment, it sounds more closer to what the human ear has a natural roll-off at about 8,000 hertz. And a lot of these, will do up to, 20,000 hertz, but the ear doesn't necessarily hear all this. So like digital stuff to me sounds a little too shiny. So I try to warm things up as much as I can. You see here, I'm ducking out around 80 hertz is the shelf. See this shelf, and then these are notch or bell curve or whatever. So I'm pulling out the low end. I'm rolling off the low end to make room for the bass, make room for the drums. Acoustic guitar is more of a mid-range instrument. So sometimes if you record acoustic guitar with it too close, you get a lot of boominess you got to get rid of. So you kind of want the guitar to live in this mid-range area to make room for other stuff. But then I'm also rolling off this top end, keeping it. With guitars, I usually roll off the top end to kind of make room for the vocals and other things that, need to live more in that area. So that's what I've got going there with the acoustic guitar. Don't have anything on this kick because, like I said, it's recorded very well. But I do have all my drums running through this. And sometimes I'll compress the whole drum kit if it's not giving me what I want. If it's just kind of dead or dry, I'll compress it and use certain things to tighten it up or give it more punch or whatever. In this case, I'm just thickening it up. This gives you kind of some more saturation, mid-range warmth, and a little top end to just open it up. This is a kind of a mastering plug-in, or you can really use it for whatever you want, but it's over here in this mastering section. You got some different things. And then my vocals, what I've done here, you see this Vox BIP. When you take a vocal in Logic, sometimes my plugins bog down my computer. So I will bounce it in place in Logic. And I believe how you do that is Control-click. Actually, I think it's in File, Bounce Track in Place. And then what that does, that takes the signal with all the plugins and basically prints it and finalizes it and puts it in another track. So then it's how it is with all the plugins without having to run all the plugins. So that kind of frees your computer up from having to process. All of these are like little mini programs that your computer has to try and use processing power to run. And so that's what I've done here. So this is the old section. Let's see, plugins load as needed. All right, so they were inactive. Yeah, so over here you see my vocal setup. Now this is a plugin I used to have, but I don't anymore. I will get back at some point, but so I showed you the other mic setup. They have these other mic packages too. This is called the Blackbird Studio, which basically there's a studio here in Nashville called Blackbird. They have probably some of the most unique and rare vintage microphones that you can actually rent and then use in their studio as well. But these mics are probably anywhere from 10 to 20 grand. I mean, like some of these are so rare that they, essentially, like, I think you pay a few $100, or if you buy the microphone, which is like $500 or $700, I'm not sure. Then you get one of these. I think you get this one, and you can add these on. But for like a few $100, you're getting potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of microphones, which is just crazy, and they sound fantastic, especially this one. I use this one a lot on some other stuff. You get it's a model of what's called a Neumann German microphone, U87, and then there's 3 of them. So they modeled one from the 60s that, like, it's like Beatles, like what the Beatles would have used, like Abbey Road or something, some crazy vintage mic, and then I think one from the 80s, and then one modern one. So depending on what you want, and you can change the saturation, more of it, less of it. And then this is another preamp model, modeling a Neve 1073, which is kind of an industry standard, very warm preamp. So you can, dig into it to give yourself more. It's like the more you dig in, the more warmth you get, but the more you dig in, like if you go this way, you'll get distortion. If you might want that. But then this will start to light up, and you'll see you're getting distortion. And you can also trim, just turn it up or down. This is an SSL model compressor, which is a very famous compressor. No, it's not. An EQ, excuse me. And very precise. You can do a lot of good stuff with this. I'm rolling off 70 hertz, getting rid of the real low stuff, where the vocals just don't exist. Sometimes I'll go even higher depending on the sound and how it's sitting in the mix. My vocals tend to have this real cutting, kind of buzzy thing, and sometimes, like, as you compress and amplify the sound, that gets really harsh. So I'll pull that out, just to keep it from being harsh and keep it warm and smooth. And then let's see what else. It's kind of this low mid-range. It's kind of like, ooh, it's kind of real honky down here kind of thing, just to open it up. And then I could play it and show you without.
Break every chain.
No, I can't, because these aren't active. That's right. This was before, and now I've printed the vocal. So this is a compressor I pretty much always use on the front end. The very first compressor I'll hit. It's a very famous compressor, modeled after LA2A. It's called Opto. It's optical. It's triggered by optical, like a light. I don't know how that works, but different compressors use different things to trigger their compression. And so this seems to be a really nice way, just on the front end, to begin to even it out. I usually use 2 to 3 compressors on a vocal, where one is compressing a little bit, the next one's compressing a little more, and each of them have a different tone and character. Some are a little more aggressive, some kind of thicken it up. So they just each have a different vibe and sound that I'll use to get all I can out of a vocal or an instrument. And this is a de-esser, so all of the kind of sounds can also just compress and pull out some of the harshness. I wish I had a squeaky chair plug in. Just get rid of the chair. I just need to buy another chair. This is a fresh air plug-in. Adds a lot of there you go. Adds a high sparkle, tells you. And this adds high mid presence. Just really nice, musical. This is called Snap Heap. This is the trick I learned on the Slate Academy. So, like, when you sign up for their plugins, there's some educational stuff, and I believe this Justice League must have done a tutorial and gave away some stuff that they use. This is a user preset that you download, and basically what it does is, it's like, you can automate a vocal without compressing it. So, like, if you dip down in volume, or if you go high in volume, you can change those levels just to even it out. So that's what this does. It actually will just auto follow your vocal and even those places out. Just kind of gives it, in addition to compression, compression sometimes doesn't get all of the places where the vocal dips down. So you want your vocal to stay up and across the mix the whole time. So that's just another way to get your mix to stand out, and a way to kind of follow the level without doing it yourself. It's another one from that little teaching that they did in a plug-in user preset, where you're kind of adding distortion or harmonic distortion overdrive to this mid-range. Just brings out a nice warm middle section of the vocal, brings it forward, warms it up. So those are the things I'm using on vocals. Let's see. Also in this section, so I heard I think it was Timbaland, maybe. It said, in his production style, like, you kind of want to give the listener something new every 4 bars. So as a progression, it's like, as the song, if they're hearing the same thing over and over, the listener can get bored. So it's kind of like you want to introduce something new every 4 bars. So kind of like, this isn't exactly 4 bars, I don't think. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it is. So we have this.
There's a Holy Ghost Bible.
So you have vocals, acoustic, and a kick. And then you get here, and you switch into a new section. Well, here comes a new thing. This is this Wurlitzer. No.
Let every tongue confess.
All right, there's a little shift. And tonal thing, too. This is a cool plugin. It's real cheap. It's like $25. This guy, Adam Monroe, he makes a bunch of plugins. This one's model's a Wurlitzer, which is an old vintage electric piano that has just the coolest sound. It's probably one of my favorite instruments on the planet. Just has this cool vibe, and it's hard to find ones that model it well, and this is one that people recommend and I checked out, but you can kind of hear, or not. Why is it not playing? I don't know why it's not playing. Come on.
Let every tongue confess that Jesus is.
What? This is confusing. What just happened? I don't know what to tell you. That's weird.
Every tongue.
I mean, just gone.
Let every tongue. Let every tongue confess that Jesus is the King. And one accord.
Oh, it's the latency thing. I don't know. My vocals are latent, which means there's delay between me and them, and it seems to have decided that.
Let every tongue.
I don't know. Goodness gracious. 1 second. So, shows you what I'm doing there. And as far as arrangement, I'm using just a couple notes. The choices of notes you use is really key in arrangement. Like, some people come in and they use all the notes on all the instruments, and it's just like, can create absolute chaos and sonic just kind of like overlap. And you want to kind of make this, you want to think of arrangement as kind of a puzzle where everything is doing a certain piece, So that's just kind of how I've approached this. But I've also chosen these notes because of the tone and the vibe. So I'm using, this is in the key of D, I believe. So I'm using, let's see, D and G. Is that a 4th? I'm using just a couple notes to give a particular sound. It's a 5th because I'm going to the G chord. So I'm playing a 5th. So the 5th has a tendency to be a little darker or a little, it's called a perfect interval. It just kind of like, those old monk, what are they called? Gregorian chants, like that's all fifths, has a certain like eerie vibe. And I purposely left out the third because when you add in the third, it gives the let's see, I can't trigger it. If you add in the third, it tells you whether it feels happy or sad. And in this bluesy kind of thing, the third can make it a little too happy, a little too less bluesy, less swampy. I really wanted the swampy thing, so that's why I made that choice.
Let every tongue confess.
And then another trick that I'll use sometimes is if I have instruments that are just a single instrument that's a mono or even a stereo that I want to spread out wide, there's this thing called the Haas effect, which basically the Haas effect says, I think if you take a signal and delay it past 20 milliseconds, the human ear will identify it as two different sources. And so that's what this is doing. So you have one on the left and one on the right, and there's a certain delay, which is 30 milliseconds. So once you get past that, it splits out and it gives you the stereo image as opposed to it just being one place in the mix. It's spread out wide. So it's kind of what's happening here mix-wise. It goes from right up the middle.
Holy Ghost, Bible.
Everything's right up the middle, and then it spreads out, and then when it gets to here, the chorus, it'll spread out even more with the vocals, and then here comes the bass. Sonically, it'll go, everything's in the mid-range, and then it'll extend lower. So there's this, this movement, not only in the number of instruments, but sonic movement. So you're going widening of the sonic thing to where, you're expanding, wider, more frequency. You'll hear here,
demons start to tremble, devils go insane.
So you got a groove that comes in because of the bass. You've got the chain, you've got the high vocals, so you have a little more frequency response, but you're not all in. So we got a groove, we got a bass, we got some movement, but still, it's still sparse. It's still, the party hasn't cranked all the way up. So my bass tone here, I'm real stickler for the bass tone because I'm a huge fan of a guy named James Jamerson who played bass in the Funk Brothers, which was the backing band at Motown, and he had a particular tone that I just love. So I try to kind of mimic that tone. I have flat wounds on my bass. I have a foam piece at the bottom, which kind of just doesn't ring out as much, but gives you kind of more punch and control. And so that's what I'm kind of go for here, is real punchy, mid-rangey bass. So what I'm doing is I run it through this virtual drive, which is essentially like having a Neve 1073 preamp and then a Neve EQ. I'm rolling off the top. I'm giving, kind of some bump in the mid-range. Sometimes if you need your bass to stick out in the mix, sometimes 500 will kind of give you that mid-range. A little bottom boost, and then I'm rolling off real low up to 46 just to get rid of like the low sub. It helps to clean up the mix if you do that through various things. You don't get, sometimes there's just muddy stuff in the bottom. And this is saturation, so I'm adding, it's like running it through a tube, some kind of a tube box or preamp, or it's adding saturation, harmonic distortion, which just adds fullness to the sound. And then this LA2A, which I'll use a lot on bass, definitely vocals, and kick seem to be three that I'll use this on. It just seems to give it a nice punch and warmth without squashing it too much. You can dig into it more, but I tend to just, you'll see, just hitting it a little bit, so it keeps the edge of that plucky blum 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 without, if I go like this, watch, it really knocks the edge off, and then this is what's called virtual channel. It's essentially like having different consoles, and the effect is kind of just taking a digital source and modeling what would happen if you run it through an actual console which has analog circuitry and voltage, and it naturally brings it to a very warm and natural to the human ear space. So that's what's happening with this. Is there's these different desks or consoles at models, and you can dig into it as much as you want to get more tone or distortion or whatever. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. So that's what I'm doing with the bass. Arrangement wise, here comes my Fuller drums, which is this drum machine designer, and you'll see I have 3 let's see. Trying to remember how I got these to play. But I have 3 different kicks going. That's a snare. Kick, clap. Basically I have, let's see. Come on, play. Why don't you play? I don't know why I won't play. But I have a few different, so like one kick sound will be the very bottom. One kick sound will be, I really want to get it to play. Let me see. Oh, maybe it's this again. There it is. All right. So that's one kick. So you see, there's this low thing. It's kind of this mid-range thing. And there's a top. And then the snare has that, which is kind of that mid-range slap. And this is kind of a top, more of a crack. And what I'm doing is I'm just trying to achieve a kick and snare sound that's very full and thick, and so sometimes I'll use multiple samples to get there. And there's, however you do it, it's up to you. But sometimes one sample is lacking, and you can then export this like with all 3 of these and make it into one drum. And to me, that's a fuller sound, the full sound that I was looking for this. So that's an approach that you can use. If it's like, oh, I'm not all the way there, well, then add another sample that's going at the same time. It might give you the sound you're looking for. And then I'm adding in, looks like these chains. Devils go insane. The flames get hotter. And what happened to my drums? Lord. Demons start to tremble. So I have this chain coming in here, and then another chain coming in. Devils go insane. So it's a little more schwap. And a lot of times you can use different techniques in drum programming that kind of give you this whack. Like, it's like you can take a cymbal and reverse it, and it'll pull into that. You can hear that going on here in this thing. It's a riser. So yeah, sometimes you can use that before a snare, but I use that or these types of things. You'll hear producers use that or longer versions of that. It's just like we're leading you up into something, into a section. There's all kinds of different ways you can make them, but essentially it just pulls the listener into something that's happening. So here, and then in my vocals I have my main melody. Demons start to tremble, devils go insane. They feel the flames get hotter as they try to run away. So I have the main melody, I have the high thing, and then I have the low. Just kind of this gives it this otherworldly full vocal thing. I don't know, something interesting and eerie about it that I really liked, especially on the topic of deliverance. It's kind of this interesting, eerie kind of space that is new and I would say probably we're a little fearful of, or it's just kind of this interesting world, and I just felt like this tone and this sound kind of summed up. Somebody's calling me. Scam Likely. It's Mr. Likely. Yeah, so that's that section.
Try to hide, but they're out of time when they hear the saints proclaim.
And to break down what's happening rhythmically, you hear the kick and the snare kind of handling this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the bass comes in on the and, so it's and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, and so you get this da da do da da do da da do da da do, kind of this rolling movement thing, and I think it might be swung. So if you were to do it straight, it'd be da 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 da. That's kind of a straighter thing, but this is a little more soulful rhythm, which is swung. Boom da da boom da 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 da. Kind of has some swag, some movement, some attitude, So that's kind of what I'm doing, a vibe, It's like I'm trying to make something that makes you want to dance, makes you nod your head,
Every unclean spirit must come out in Jesus' name.
All right. So now we're in to the turnaround, which is the section between the chorus and the verse, but it's also the kind of the main lick. And one thing I think is important in music production is that every section has a focus. You'll notice that about modern production, especially in hit songs, is there's never a time where you're not sure what to listen to. Whether it's a vocal melody or a guitar lick, the ear likes to hear things that it can remember and attach to. And this is after your hook, so you have your intro, you have your verse, you have your hook. This could be considered a pre-chorus here, this little section. It's leading into the hook. Then you kind of have your turnaround, potentially a post hook, which is like another, after your hook, it's like you have another hook. It's almost like I've heard producers talking about each section is a hook after a hook after. So you're trying to get melodies that stick in people's minds and they are memorable. So after we come out of the chorus, there's a new development. Here comes the electric guitars. And they're doubling the bass. You also have a clap, a big clap come in here. So you have this lick, you have, like I mentioned before, things changing in every section, all of a sudden you have the electric guitar. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Here comes another thing. And everything has a purpose. This electric is working with the bass to move it along. Dun, 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 dun. So it's kind of this push-pull, I could have the bass, I could have the electric and the bass go dun 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 dun, like, but it wouldn't have the same effect. This kind of this, the electric guitar is filling the gaps where the drums aren't. You know what I mean? It's like everything has a space. Nothing is working against something else. Then we're going to stop. Right, so that's a production technique to make an emphasis into another section. It's just a hard stop. Sometimes do that before the chorus even to make the impact of what's coming in the chorus that more solid. Pull back and then you're back in. So then you come into the second verse, which is similar to the first, but you have the addition of the electric guitar.
You can read it in the Bible. It's written there in red. You will never be.
All right, so that's kind of padding out the background, so you don't, it's not so sparse. It's like it's a sustain, but it's not so much movement, And then here you'll get the electric guitar come back in.
Be deceived if you believe what Jesus said. We're running out of time.
There's a slide guitar coming in with some more energy. We got the Wurlitzer again. It's coming in faster than it did the first time through. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4 bars of the verse before we get to this change. Here you have looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, as opposed to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you have half the time. Sometimes in the second verse, it's like it's all about choice, but sometimes it's like you want to get back to the chorus quicker. That's the main thing. The verses are just kind of support for the chorus. Another aspect of the story, you might not need to say as much. Get back to it. So that's what's happening here. So in addition to the Wurlitzer that's coming in, you also have the electric guitars. Turn the darkness and the light, so let the fight begin. And then you have this big, like it's a very impactful movement into the chorus. I think I also have a organ. Yeah, and it was kind of cool because when I put the two together, one's going up, the other's going down. It actually sounds like a human voice. It's like, it's like, oh, that's cool. You just wanted to be a impactful thing that moves you into the chorus in a big way. And then you'll see, you can even look at the tracks here. Like, here's the chorus, first time through, this number of tracks. Then over here, this number of tracks. We're adding in a cymbal crash, the hi-hat. We're adding in these other drums. In addition to the snare. In addition to the kick. A big clap that wasn't there the time before, but was in the turnaround. A tambourine. Adding more acoustic guitars that are doing this. With the drums, you hear it. The push and pull. Right? So you have essentially a rhythmic element. It's kind of what the tambourine is doing too, These are movement devices. There's more movement added in. There's more happening, but it's all working together, as this train is coming through town and it's picking up speed. And then I've also added my lead vocal on top in a higher register on top of the vocals. This Wurlitzer, this organ, which is another simple arrangement. There's that fifth. And a lot of times, as far as playing chords, a lot of times people will move. As they're learning chords, they learn chords in one place and move it. Big leaps and bounds. And what I try to do, and it seems it's a general good practice, is find what's the chord with the least amount of movement. Sometimes you can keep one note in the chord of the next, and find a note that changes. That there's something about that movement that feels nice. And a lot of times in the chorus too, some people will do. We just have the one, like the root, the tonic, something playing that over the top of it, just real high, just to drive that home. As a production technique, and it just works. Like, you hear a lot of like Earth, Wind and Fire, where it's like just hammering that home. Like, this is what the key is. This is home. This is the time. Somehow that works as a thing as a device to have you seated in the key of the song. Right. So then there's another stop for the main hook line. It's like, I'm about to tell you what the song's about, and I'm going to stop to show you.
Every unclean spirit must come out in Jesus' name.
We got to stop, a minor, kind of a almost stop, and then a full stop, and then we're back in, right? And then what you'll hear is, back in this section, we just had the acoustic guitar, a couple other things. Well, this time through, we've got acoustic guitar, we've got electrics, and those are going to build. And then we have even more drums coming in. We have the cymbals. Oh yeah, I was going to talk about the hat. So sometimes what I'll do when I have drums that are programmed and locked into a grid, it can seem very electronic or computerized. So what I'll do is I'll add a hi-hat that I actually play myself live, and that gives it a particular sound like this. And it's even a little loose, like it's not perfect, definitely, because I'm not a drummer, like I play drums, but I'm not a drummer. And so even my playing will be a little loose, but that kind of gives it a vibe. So there's feels more human. So a lot of times if I'll have programmed drums, that's a great way to give your, because it's hard to record live drums and get them to sound good. So sometimes if you use programmed stuff and then add in just a hi-hat, it's a good way to give your track a live feel. Yeah, so we get into this section. Another kind of hooky turnaround with the guitar line, and you'll hear how it builds with the electric guitars in now. Also adding in this monster clap. So just little things that you can do to the ear that will make it say, oh, this is a new section. There's different things happening than before. We're building, still growing, moving towards a climax.
His name.
You can hear that I have one electric guitar playing a low part, one of it playing in an octave up. And then sometimes what I'll do too, if I have a guitar I want to just beef up, I'll take, let's say I'm playing a Strat or a Tele or another guitar with different tone adjustments. I'll have one with the tone that's like the neck pickup and one with the bridge pickup. So you have, it sounds like one guitar, but it's fuller, or it sounds like two guitars that one has more of mid-range, one has more of a top range. So it's like they're filling, helping to fill out a sonic space in certain ways. Then here comes another even higher electric guitar playing the same lick up higher. And it seems like they kind of switch the low and the high are on the left and the right. And so it's kind of this, you're enveloped in this guitar sound that's all around you. Another hard stop. And you could tell, when we did this song, it was, and I'll maybe release this at some point, but we had demoed it out, and I produced it out a whole other way that was a little more country. It was like, demons start to tremble, the devils go insane, when the flames get hotter, I gotta run away. It was a different vibe, and that just wasn't working for me at all. I tried all day and it didn't work. And then I kind of came back to, what, in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I was going to strip this down, I was going to try and make this as groovy, as funky, as dirty, as just kind of grunt. I'm always looking for nothing better to me than a song that just grooves hard and has so even as I'm listening to this, the groove is making me, I just locked in this feel of I just want to march and dance, that to me, that's what I was trying to get that out of this, because it was supposed to be the title track, and ended up being the title track to the film, and something that's, I don't know, encapsulates this certain vibe, And then we're into the bridge, which is a completely different thing. The groove changes a little bit. The vibe changes.
There's power in the blood to wash away sin.
The real, Mississippi blues or swampy blues, Delta blues. Bum, 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 bum. These kind of fifths, and I really like the idea. I've got a song called "The Devil Ain't Got No Music" that I wrote with my friend Jason. That I've always hated the idea that people say, oh, there's this blues or whatever is the devil's music or whatever. I've never subscribed to that idea, and I love the idea of using music that people would think is the devil's music against him, if you will. So to me, I love this concept of using this blues and using this really swampy thing to talk about the power in the name of Jesus, and how it's like casting out the devil. To me, I find it really interesting. And then so I have these claps, I have these stomps.
There's power in the blood to wash away sin.
And then I have this sample of this, seems like a choir doing, hey, man, hey. And I brought it in, I tweaked it out, I changed the key, and I'm triggering it so it just does the, hey, hey. And then at the end, hey, 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 man. You'll hear it at the end, because I say, can I get an amen? All right, so you got that thing in there. Change up. The bridge is a different chord progression. And then, here you even see this little guy that's bringing you out. This little shh. Sometimes you use that at the beginning. Sometimes you use it at the end to bring you in and out. So these little just kind of movement things shh, going into another section. And then it really breaks down before it goes all the way. So this would be the, and we talked about the roller coaster thing. This would be the full. Like you're up to the top and you're going, the drop at at the top of a roller coaster where you take you up real high, and this is the highest point. So we've built everything up to this, and right before we go all the way, we have this drop it down to basics, kind of thing. And one thing I didn't point out, in certain parts, I have, when I strip the drums back, I have this other thing going. It's like an 808 that keeps that kind of going on here. You can hear it in this drum beat. Just kind of this pulsing thing that I felt like I wanted to keep going underneath, in addition to the drums. And then have this falsetto vocal. And I mentioned earlier that I have this vocal distortion parallel thing. So I'll run my vocal out to another place, and then I'm distorting it. And by itself, sounds like that. I've even got an EQ kind of restricting it to this little mid-range kind of vintagey sound. And I'm just mixing it in to a level that feels good with the other, that it's not all the way distorted. You have a clean with a little distortion underneath. And then what I'm doing here also is I'm at the end, you'll hear it go down. So I have this pitch thing, pitch shifter. That's another slate thing, the kilohertz. So if we hit A and go to automation, you can see that it stair steps down. I don't know what notes. It sounds like the pentatonic scale, going down. I just thought that was an interesting production choice. It just is kind of like, I don't know, sold what I was trying to say there. And then you have a big drum fill. You have that big, and I even think I really emphasized that, maybe even added more tracks that do that to make it, you know, to make that really impactful on this one. And then we got all the way in.
Demons start to tremble, devils go insane. They feel the flames get hotter as they try to run away. They can try to hide, but they're out of time when they hear the saints proclaim. Every unclean spirit.
This is called the tag here, so you're repeating this for emphasis.
Every unclean spirit, every unclean spirit, every unclean spirit must come out in Jesus' name.
Then we're, this is called the outro. We got the lick going again, kind of building up to our final thing.
Every unclean spirit must come out in Jesus' name.
And I kind of use that chain, which I think, I'm not sure if I mentioned, the chains are also from that sound. All of these kind of drum samples here are from that sound. Should definitely check out. They got free stuff. You can just download a sample pack, and they got great stuff. But, you know, end with the vocals and then the chain thing, because, you know, there's songs talk about like, you know, there's power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, and there's also kind of this idea that, like, if you're under these demonic oppression or demonized, that then you're in chains. And so I thought that was a, you know, appropriate thing to emphasize what we're talking about, and then kind of these chains as a final stomp of like break the chains breaking kind of thing, you know. So that's how I chose to end it. These are all production choices that you can make, you know, how to tell a story, you know, songs and production, they're all working together to tell a story that's memorable, that's meaningful. Some things I didn't show, I've got some delays. This is like a 16th, I don't know why I called it an 8th delay, but 16th, like a slap delay, kind of an old vintagey thing. There's a room. This is the stock, Logic stock tape delay, it's great. This is a Slate reverb model, which has all these, like this alone I think is like $10,000 if you were to buy it in real life, the Bricasti. This is an old vintage thing, 480L Lexicon. So there's all these different hardware pieces that it models that by itself are very expensive. Another delay, looks like a quarter note delay, probably used for the chorus when I need more space and more you know, delay. Excuse me. Another reverb. Look like that's a bigger reverb, probably for the Amen choir thing. And then over here on the mix bus, I don't have them engaged at the moment, but first thing I have is I'm cleaning up that low end, just making sure there's nothing heavy down there to kind of gunk it up. And they say to use this linear EQ because sometimes they use a regular EQ on your mix. It can do phasey things where like adds or messes with your frequency response. So the linear phase EQ is supposed to keep everything in line. So I'll use the linear EQ if I need to make changes on the mix bus. This is another Slate thing, which is models various tape machines and aspects of the tape machine. These are different types of tape. This is different tape speed, different bias. It's basically how it treats or distorts at certain levels, certain frequencies. And then this is like a 16-track machine or a 2-track machine. How your settings are set determines how quickly this will distort, tone, all kinds of things. So this is like another way of saturating the mix, taking it out of a digital space and bringing it into a more analog response. This is a virtual mix bus. It's essentially like having a console that in this case would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and having your mix run through that and hitting the transformers and the voltage and the copper wires that are natural physical things that have a natural physical analog real life response. All of these things are just used to add vibe and take it out of a digital space and more into a warm analog space. This is SSL model compressor, widely used on mix bus. Just kind of glue it together. Let's see. Settings are pretty slow attack. You can kind of mess with this as the song, depending on the song, but usually very slow attack. You're not squashing it too much. You're just tightening it up a little bit. 4-to-1 ratio. And then this knob here you can actually use to roll off the bottom end so that the bottom end isn't triggering the compression as much. This is an imaging plug-in, which is like using it to make it wider. A lot of times I'll use it while mixing just to hear it a certain way, and then I'll pull it off before I send it to mastering, because the mastering does that much better than me. This plugin is crazy. I don't even change anything on it usually, besides maybe how much limiting it does. But it's just a crazy plugin, and it seems to be like some kind of a multi-band compressor that just has a natural inclination towards how music's supposed to sound. Just treats it in a very nice way. Kind of use it as a finalizer. And then this is a clipper. Well, actually, sometimes there's peaks and stuff that are maybe not so audible, but cause your mix to be more dynamic and not be able to get as much volume out of it. So this is just it's kind of like treating it as like a brick wall limiter too, just to make sure you're not clipping, make sure you're not going over. It's a hard edge that will, and then sometimes even transparently knock off peaks that keep it from being able to push the volume level or certain aspects of the final mix. Let's see if there's anything I haven't covered. Sometimes you'll see these gain plugins. Sometimes with automation, I want to have access to these faders. If you automate in Logic, then it kind of makes the fader stick to that level. Let's say you're at a certain level and then it moves later. Well, then it's kind of written in stone, and this fader has to adhere to that. So if I go in and move this up, it's going to go back to where it was. So I'll automate the gain. So then this is my automation, and this I can still use to just move up and down as I need to. So that's what those are. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. Hopefully you've learned something. I'll do more of these. I have plenty of other tracks to do it with. We can learn other things, but just wanted to do that, and yeah, hopefully it helps you on your journey. You can make better music and grow and creatively. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to listen to stuff you've done, give you tips, and yeah, that's how I do things in that particular instance. So anyways, thanks for watching. See you next time.